Good morning. My name is Ted Dintersmith. I'm here from the United States. I'm not an education person by background. I spent my career in venture capital, so in technology, backing early stage entrepreneurs. But I know enough about education to know we can't start this morning without a pop quiz. And so I've got two questions that I'm going to ask each of you to answer, first by yourself, and then I want you to spend a couple minutes talking to somebody around you and compare your answers. Okay, so I'm hoping you can all read this, but the first one is, in the most recent decade of fully reported numbers, what country lost 10 million jobs in manufacturing? Okay, A, Russia, B, the United States, C, China, D, and we could wish for this, Sweden, and E, no country has lost more than 3 million manufacturing jobs. Okay, so give this a little thought. I want you to, if you jot this down on a piece of paper. Okay, everybody got their answer? And if I'm lucky, we'll get to the next one. Okay, so this is a United States specific question. So you'll have, if you miss it, you're forgiven because it's not from Finland. But this is the most recent 4 years of college graduates. Now in the United States, college is not free. So most kids in the United States are spending somewhere between, let's say, 40,000 euros to 150,000 euros to get a college degree. So the last 4 years of college graduates in the United States, what percent are unemployed? We all know what unemployed means, or underemployed. And underemployed is defined as they have a job, but it's a job that historically any high school graduate could fill. Okay, so you see the numbers there, 7.8%, 11.6%, 17.2%, 23.2%, and 53.5%. Okay, now does everybody have their answers to manufacturing jobs and under and unemployment rates? And then let's just take a couple minutes, turn to somebody around you, tell them what your answers were, hear what their answers were, and sort of think a little bit about why you think these answers made sense or not. Okay, everybody have their answers? I'm not going to give you the correct answers till the end, so you will be in suspense. But I want to spend a little bit of time. So Colin is going to give you great talk on what to do. I'm going to focus on why to do it and what the urgency is. And I'm going to start with this graph. And this is the exponential growth in technology. And so unfortunately, I'm old enough, I go back, not quite to, 1750 on this chart, but I go back further than I'd like to think. And what's interesting, right, is that if you look at the way technology is expanding or accelerating, it is exponential growth. And there's something interesting about an exponential growth curve, because if you look right in here, it looks at it, to most people, when you're in the middle of it, it looks linear. It looks like things are changing fairly steadily. But if you back up and look at it, at any point in time, it's actually accelerating. And acceleration is really important, because what that means is the way electronics accelerates, in every decade, there's a 10x increase in the performance of computational power. So 10 times increase in a decade. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, I went back, I was in graduate school roughly I finished in 1981. And back then, I remember sitting in on seminars with the top artificial intelligence people in the world. And they debated whether computers could ever compete with a pretty good chess player. And most people felt that computers couldn't compete against a good, accomplished chess player, because chess is so strategic and so creative. Almost no one said it could be better than any human. Well, in 1997, IBM's supercomputer running software beat Garry Kasparov in chess. So in 1997, that's how many years ago? More than 15 years ago, the best chess player in the world was a computer. Okay, now, so think about that. Computers beat the best chess player. A second example, and I'm in the right country to bring this example up. In 2005, if you had asked people what a mobile phone was going to look like in 2014, very few people would say it was going to do something like this. Okay, sorry to Nokia. So what do we have today? In less than 8 years, smartphones, Apple sold, each hour of the last quarter, Apple sold 34,000 smartphones per hour every single hour of the quarter. They sold over 1 billion smartphones. There are 1 million apps. What this means is that anybody, whether you're 10 years old or our age or whatever, has with you every single minute of the day more resources you could ever imagine. I mean, we on basic personal productivity basis, put the very best, most productive person in 1980 to shame today, just anyone, okay? And so if you look at that, it's actually stunning, because think about how much progress. Think about going from a Nokia phone in 2005 to this today. Okay, that's dramatic breakthrough. And it's not just changing your phone, it's ravaging economies. In the US, taxi drivers are being replaced by Uber. Hotels are being replaced by Airbnb. Sector after sector of the economy is disappearing to brand new, more agile, more mobile empowered applications. So now if you look at what's going to happen in the next 10 years, we can only imagine. But I want to give you an example of just how surprising it's going to be to all of us. It's a book cover, right? So this seems like an odd place to start. But Frank Levy and Richard Merton are two of the top labor economists in the world. One's at Harvard, one's at MIT. And they're not just any old labor economists. They've been writing for their entire careers about how quickly automated solutions are replacing people in the labor market. And so they wrote this book. This book is less than 10 years old. And they talked about category after category where people won't be doing that job in the future, where it will be done by artificial intelligence software, smart agile robots, automated solutions outsourced to far less wage-intensive countries, job after job category disappearing. To be fair, though, Levy and Merton wanted to show that automation won't replace everything. And these guys think about this all the time. This is their job. And they came up with one example to really highlight the fact that computers won't take over everything. So what was their example? Driving a car. And they go through in great detail over 3 or 4 pages just how complicated it is to make a turn in traffic, how that will always be beyond the reach of a computer, how that is the one area, there are going to be some things safe from automation. Well, what happened within 5 years of that book being published? Google now has a driverless car that's many times safer than the best human-driven car. Hundreds of thousands of miles driven, one accident, and that was caused by another driver rear-ending the Google driverless car. So why do I mention this? This is absolutely important, right? Because there will be no structured routine job in the economy. Your economy, the US economy, China's economy, Japan's economy, anybody's economy. No structured routine job is safe. Okay, these jobs, I went through the top 10 employment classes in the United States, the job categories that have the most people: fast food workers, customer service, retail. Every single one, I know several startups that are developing products to replace the people in those job categories. Now, will every startup succeed? No. Will some of them succeed? Absolutely. And will we be seeing things happen in the next 10 years that surprise us far more than this surprised Nokia 10 years ago? That you can count on. The other thing that's true is it's not just the low-class job. It's not just what we traditionally view as the low-class or the blue-collar jobs. This is not a good time to be finishing up your degree to be a radiologist. It's not a good time to be getting done with a law degree. In the United States, the unemployment rate out of the top 10 law schools out of the last year is 15%. 15% of people graduating from the very best law schools in the United States couldn't get jobs, and a substantial number of others got internships paying less than minimum wage. Why? So much of law is being automated. Entry-level jobs are disappearing. So many college kids come out, and the things that used to be readily available, that bottom rung of the economic ladder that used to be 6 inches off the ground is now 14 meters off the ground. I'll use meters. And so what that's doing is it's creating the beginnings, but this is going to get dramatically more pronounced, the beginnings of a productivity gap that has the potential to rip apart civil society. So in our economy, this is a great graph, and I want to spend a little bit of time on it. But for decades, overall economic growth in the United States went hand in hand with median wages and hand in hand with the number of jobs. So as businesses grew and did better, more and more people were hired, wage levels went up. So everybody was in harmony. Okay, so you enjoyed a robust multi-decade growth path where lots of people left school, high school, college, got an entry-level job, moved up through the labor ranks, did well, society held together, the rising tide lifted all ships. But look at what happened about 20 years ago. The first thing that decoupled was median household income. And so for a whole set of people coming into the labor market, their skills just weren't valued very much anymore. And then if you look at the total employment, that decouples right around 1997. Now, Netscape went public in 1995. The internet really rolled out in force in 1997. And suddenly, businesses could get by on fewer and fewer employees. Okay, so think about that, right? And if this is not temporary but systematic, and if technology is accelerating, what can you conclude? You can conclude that if you come out of school and you're pretty good, if you come out of school and you can follow instructions, if you come out of school and you're a good student, that's not enough. You might easily be unemployed. You might be working 32 hours a week for Starbucks. And that's exactly what's happening in the United States. And so we see dramatic differences in the growth rates of income. So the top 1% doing better and better and better, everyone else struggling. And we see early signs. I mean, I refer to Occupy Wall Street as an early tremor before a major earthquake. And that's exactly what society is headed for. Now, is it beyond our control or imagination to take steps to intervene in this? I mean, absolutely not. Because the other thing that's happening is you see these amazing and inspiring things where people all over the world, different ages, different categories, are coming up with the most innovative and creative ways to help their community move forward. So they are not being left behind, and they're not being put on the beach. They're not working 32 hours a week with lots of student loan debt or lots of time spent doing something in school, just getting a degree. And so at the same time that opportunities are being closed, many new opportunities are being opened. But they're not being opened generally. And what I find, so why did I leave venture capital and spend my time on education? I left it for really three reasons. One is I could see that all these companies that were being formed by the most talented entrepreneurs in the world, where they were not waking up every morning saying, gee, I can't wait to put millions of people out of work. Nevertheless, in many cases, those companies were, in fact, going to be putting thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people out of work. Look at, in our country, Amazon's impact on small business operations. And so Amazon has put out tens and tens of thousands of small mom and pop stores and been able to do it with far fewer people. If you go to the Amazon shipping floor, they bought a company that friends of mine invested in for $750 million. It is completely automated. So, the customer service at Amazon, completely automated. The recommendations, completely automated. The returns, everything about Amazon is completely automated. And what happened in its wake is that hundreds of thousands of retail jobs disappeared. But at the same time, Amazon offers Amazon Web Services. And what that means is that anybody who wants to start a new company can do it for, when I started in venture capital, to start a new company generally required millions and millions of dollars, millions and millions of euros of capital to get going. Today, companies like Instagram, good example, get started in a weekend and get acquired for $1 billion when they have 11 people. Okay, so you're seeing this phenomena where if you are creative, bold, innovative, you can come up with all sorts of ways to make your world better. And it's not just a business observation, it's a community service, public policy, academic research observation. That the world is shifting away from skills we've traditionally valued in education. The second thing I observed in venture capital was good students generally made bad innovators. Okay, and that's a scary thing. But what I found, and I've been in venture since 1987, interviewed a lot of people, and sort of each 5 to 10 years that went by, I found the better the student, the worse they did in an unstructured, innovative world. And that's because in the United States, school has gotten much more intense. So school, when I grew up, I graduated from college in 1974, I still remember in high school, we have this thing called the SAT, which is an multiple choice entrance test to get into college. Nobody did any preparation for the SAT. They made an announcement on my high school loudspeaker one day and said, if you're thinking about doing this thing called college, you need to sign up for the SAT. And all of us would go in and take the test. We'd have to read the instructions because we'd never seen anything like that before. Well, today the intensity level in school is sky high in the United States. And the United States is making a mistake I totally hope Finland doesn't make, which is the United States obsesses about international test scores. I mean, we have politicians that wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat because we are 17th and Finland, Korea, and Singapore are 1, 2, and 3, or 3, 2, and 1, or whatever. And I've met with Obama about this, President Obama, and I've said, would you in a million years really want to trade any aspect of our society with Korea's? I mean, do you know how many Nobel Prizes have been won by Korean researchers? 0. Do you know how many innovative companies have been started by Korean-based companies? I think that's 0. You know, so yet, in our country, because we're numbers obsessed, we sit there and believe our future will be jeopardized by Korea running us out of the world economy. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. But what are we doing in the process? Back to good students making bad innovators, is that our kids go through 12 to 16 years of intensive education where they basically learn how to jump through hoops. They don't care about learning anymore. Our best students want to know, will it be on the test, not whether it's interesting or important to learn. Our best students want to know what answer the teacher expects, not what's a creative, different approach to it. Our best students want to know what's the least amount of time they've got to spend to get a certain grade, not how they can go deeply into something and understand something new and different. And our education system, our society, and our students obsess on placement instead of purpose. And so everybody's worried about how we compare to somebody else, and we spend very little time worried about how we can make the world better. And as a result, you see growing numbers of teenage suicides in our country, increased level of dissatisfaction. You take those top colleges that everybody obsesses about going to, and the college counseling offices will say many of these kids are a complete and total mess. And they are still being managed remotely by their parents. When they get a B- in a course at Harvard, their parents will call the teacher, the professor, to try to get the grade changed. Think about that. You know, a 21-year-old in college having parents try to change the grade. But that's exactly what happens. And the third thing I observed, and I observed it initially through my kids, and then now I spend all my time on school-related things. But with my kids, initially, as they were quite young, 10 years ago, they were in, I think, 5th and 4th grade, 4th and 3rd grade. You know, I said, my gosh, it's almost as though school was designed to drill the creativity out of them. And then I started to research what was going on with our school system. And I modified that statement, and I took out the word almost, because I realized that the United States school model, and it's largely the global model, was in fact designed in 1893 to eliminate creativity and innovation from people trained for an industrial economy. And so if you were Henry Ford wanting to hire people for an automobile manufacturing line, you didn't want somebody who came up with a creative way to insert widget A in slot B. You wanted people to be able to do repetitive operations quickly under time pressure without deviation or mistakes. And we live with that model to this day. And what's cursing the United States, right, is that because we are so worried about being behind Korea or Finland or Singapore, and most people, by the way, in the United States don't know the difference. Yeah, I find that amazing when I talk to people. They will refer to the 3 countries as a cluster. And they don't realize the dramatic differences between the approach you take and the approach taken in Korea, right? I mean, all 3 do really well on a standardized test, so therefore all 3 must have great education systems, and therefore they all must be the same. And I say that there couldn't be more difference in the, you know, if you travel and visit these schools, they're night and day. But I do hope, as I say, my fervent wish for Finland is to not worry about whether you're 5th or 1st or 3rd or 8th or whatever, because at the end of the day, those scores are, I think, largely irrelevant measures of anything. And so I just, in terms of the things I've done, I just got done, we just premiered the film at Sundance Film Festival. I don't know if any of you follow documentaries, but Sundance is largely recognized as the most prestigious documentary film festival in the world. And I funded a film team to do a film on education. And one of the people we interviewed for that was a person named Laszlo Bach. And probably none of you have heard of Laszlo, but he is Senior VP for People and Human Resources at Google. Okay, so we've all heard of Google. And it's interesting because Google for 15 years hired everybody based on grade point average, SATs, and eliteness of the college. And they did fine with that strategy. They thought they were doing all sorts of things smart in a really well thought out way. So they would say, if you went to a second tier college, don't even bother applying. If you went to Harvard and your SATs were below 700 per, don't bother applying. They just looked at those. So Laszlo went and looked at all the data across all the people they hired. And he found that there was no correlation between those variables and how well they did at Google. None. And so they completely rethought their hiring criteria because they realized that the thing that mattered the most at Google, and the question they now focus on, is describe a really difficult problem you took on where you failed multiple times, where it took a sustained amount of perseverance, resilience, and grit, and tell us what you accomplished. That is highly correlated to how kids do it, young hires do at Google. Grade point average, SATs, prestigiousness of their undergraduate institution had a very modest correlation to first-year performance and no long-term correlation. So now many of the groups at Google have up to 15-20% of their new hires have never went to college. And there are all sorts of amazing, transparent ways to tell the capabilities of people. In software, for instance, I don't know if you know this thing called GitHub. Well, GitHub is an open source repository for your code. And so if the 4 people here were all software developers and 2 went to amazing colleges with high grade point averages and 2 were high school dropouts, I could just look at GitHub and see their code. And if I were somebody really capable, which you would hope your hiring person for software developers knew something about software, I'd be able to tell whose code was foundational and important and whose was derivative and marginal. Much like if you look at the comments section on an article in a thoughtful magazine or newspaper, you'll see, yeah, I can see their comment, it's really interesting, got lots of replies and engaged lots of discussion versus kind of a throwaway comment. And so we're seeing a world shift from education credentials to more authentic measures. And we're seeing people begin to realize that the narrow set of cognitive capabilities tested on standardized tests are only a modest predictor of anything of importance or consequence. Which leads me to education, and this is where, as I say, the other people will do a far better job. But I then launched myself on a campaign to find the most interesting and innovative education models across the world. And I spent a lot of time, I was one of the people representing the United States at the UN General Assembly in 2012. So I focused on global education. I visited probably 100 schools outside of the US and probably several hundred in the US, all the time looking for who's doing things that are interesting. And I wish I could say that a lot of the schools are doing things that are interesting. I have to report back, most are doing things that are pretty dreadful. And what I found in the US is that a lot of the schools that people viewed as outstanding, there's actually very little learning that's going on at those schools. And you'd say, well, how can that be? But let me just give you an example. I'm going to skip around a little bit. But so this is our third test question, so be ready. But one of the places I visited was Harvard, the same school I talked about earlier. And I met somebody there named Eric Mazur. And Eric is not a slouch. So Eric is chair of the applied physics department at Harvard. He's taught there for 30 years. He's been consistently rated as one of the top performing professors at Harvard. And Eric had an epiphany. So for his first 15 years at Harvard, he taught physics the way he learned physics. And I haven't visited that many science classes here, so I can't tell you how science is taught across school after school in Finland, but I have visited lots of science classes in the United States, high schools, colleges, schools people view as great, schools people view as poor. And what Eric stumbled across 15 years ago was a study done by a couple of professors at a less prestigious school in the US, Arizona State University. Still a good school, and those professors began to be concerned that their students were learning nothing in their physics classes. And how did they define learning? Well, they said, and this will sound relatively intuitive, but they said if you're learning physics, you should be learning how the world works. Okay, does that seem unreasonable to people? And so they came up with a simple 25-question test that said, how does the world work? And so they had examples like an airplane's flying overhead, it drops a big bunch of bricks out of it. What's the trajectory of the bricks? That's physics, right? And their kids their students at the beginning of the year were essentially random in their answers. And then in the course of a full year of physics at Arizona State, at the end of the year, with not a different test with the same general ideas, with the exact same test. No change at all in the questions. The same test they had had in September, still random. Whether they had A's in physics at Arizona State, B's, F's, or dropped out, they were guessing. They had no idea how the world worked, and they had no improvement over the course of a year of college physics education. So you'd say, okay, that's a school. Maybe some of you have heard of Arizona State. Maybe some of you went there. Maybe some of you hadn't. I know you've all heard of Harvard, right? So think about the average physics student at Harvard. This is a kid that did amazingly well in high school physics. This is a kid that took in the United States the advanced placement physics exam, and almost all of his students got a 5 on the AP physics test. These were kids that were taking physics from the top-rated professor at Harvard. Okay, so he gives them the same test that they used in Arizona. How did they do at the beginning? Basically random. Okay, so their entirety of high school background helped them understand nothing about how the world worked. Okay, so now you have a year later, Harvard, great professor, but great professor doing what? He was a great professor putting up equations on a blackboard and saying, boom, I'm going to teach you this month about electricity. So how is electricity taught in science classes? So I say, I don't know how it's taught in Finland because I haven't visited high school science or college physics classes here. I visited a lot of other places. The way we teach electricity in college and high school in the United States is, I will turn my back to you, I will scribble on the blackboard or whiteboard, Coulomb's law. Be sure you spell it right, C-O-U-L-O-M-B''S. I'll write up F equals a constant Q1 times Q2 over R squared. You will write that down in your notebook, okay? I will give you 3 parameters and ask you to compute the 4th. But we'll start with Q1, Q2, and R, so they're all on the same side of the equation, and you'll compute force. And if you do it without making a math mistake and get the units right, you clearly understand electricity. And if you can do 5 of those in a row right, you must be an expert on electricity. And I will say, bingo, you understand electricity. It's time to move on to gravity or something else. And so that's the way Eric taught. And then when he gave his kids these conceptual questions, random. And when the end of his course, random. Okay? These are kids with A's at Harvard, with the best professor in physics at Harvard, with 5s on their advanced placement tests in high school, that had no understanding through a year of college physics that what most people view as a preeminent university in the world did not understand how the world works. They could shove numbers into formulas. They could do things any smartphone can do. They could do them quickly and test under time pressure. They didn't botch the units. Guess what? All those things they were good at are irrelevant in 2015 when you've got a smartphone next to you. That's what they had learned. So Eric completely retooled his class. If you go to his class today, and given that you guys have world dominance in education, it'd be a very interesting connection to make. If you go to his class today, Eric says almost nothing. Okay, so you will observe all these kids paying $60,000, 45,000 euros to go to Harvard in a class in physics where Eric Mazur, the professor, says next to nothing. And so what's he do? And you're going to do it. This would be a typical question. Consider a rectangular metal plate with a circular hole in it. Okay. Now, we're going to heat this plate uniformly. What happens to the diameter of the hole? Okay, it can only be three things, right? It can only increase, stay the same, or decrease. So I want each of you to think about it for a second and then find those same people you talked to about China's manufacturing jobs or under an unemployment rate in the US and compare answers. But increases, stays the same, or decreases. Okay, everybody got their answer? So what's interesting about, there are so many things that are interesting about this question. I observed this in his classes, but I also observed that he gave a talk to the Google R&D Center in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So you can imagine if you were now hired by Google as one of their top research people, how you did in physics as an undergraduate in college and high school. Guess how Google's people did on this? Random. What's interesting, though, is the same thing that happened at Google happens in Eric's classes, is that when people get together and talk about it, they change their mind. I've seen questions like this in Eric's classes where at the beginning, 10% of the class got the question right. So there are groups talking where everybody's initial answer is wrong. So you're wrong, and you're wrong, and you get together and you're trying to convince each other why your wrong answer is correct. And in the process of articulating that answer and defending it and having other people ask you questions, you have to revise your thinking. And over a period, Eric will give them more like 15 minutes. I gave you, a minute. People will go from 10% right to 85% right. And then what he does at the end, he says, okay, who believes it's increases? Somebody will give their best answer. Stays the same, somebody will give their best answer. Decreases, they'll give their best answer. And by then, it's pretty apparent to people what the answer is. Now, I took that and I've funded a group in India that's focused on teaching low-income kids the math and science they need to get into the Indian Institute of Technology. And IIT, I don't know if any of you, if you want to really feel humbled, look up online the IIT entrance exam sometime. It is the hardest exam I could ever imagine. I mean, I've got a background, I got a PhD in math modeling, and I looked at the questions on probability, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not getting into IIT. And so these Indian guys met with Eric. They're very entrepreneurial and resourceful. They found a lot of retired IIT professors, and they completely retooled high school chemistry, physics, and math so that it's all taught in this way. But they have very little resources, and they're dealing with low-income kids after school. And they initially tried to get it done with the best teachers they could find and afford. And that didn't work too well. But in some of the learning centers, they couldn't even get a teacher there. So they could find a social worker. So they had this sort of almost accidental A versus B experience. Teachers with these students after school, social workers with these students after school. Well, guess what? The social worker groups substantially outperformed the teacher groups. Now, why is that? It's because great teachers can be transformational, but if you're only average on a subject, you still get into that room and you feel like your job is to explain it to the kids. And so when they watch what was going on, you had an average teacher trying to explain something to the kids, and the kids shutting it out and not doing it. In the social worker classes, the kids felt, I have no other choice than to figure it out myself, or in teams of people. But these kids often had really acute problems at home, so they had somebody there to help. What else is interesting? Their kids that took the IIT entrance exam, their pass rate was 20 times the national average. Social workers, no lecturer, no nothing, no internet access, no nothing, 20 times the national average. And the point I'd like to make, and I'll close with this, but I could go on forever as you can imagine, but the first is, nothing is more misunderstood in our world than the role of technology in education. And so I'll give you an example of something that I think is ludicrous. Using an iPad or a tablet to teach the mechanics of calculus. Okay, if somebody says they're doing that, I think that is a wake-up call for you to say, what are you thinking? And the reason is this, is that no one does integrals and derivatives by hand in the workplace. No one does it in research. No one anywhere in the world other than high school calculus teachers do as an adult integrals and derivatives by hand. It's all done computationally. So why are we teaching kids in our country for 9 months, and it's the single most important factor in whether a kid can get a science or engineering degree, teaching them 9 months of something they'll never do? Okay? So instead, why not have them, why don't have an education system that said, and then we think it's a big advance to do that on an iPad or a tablet. And so we're teaching something that's now obsolete in 2015 because of computational resources, but putting it on something electronic and saying, aren't we being innovative? Electronic flashcards, right? Think about that. That happens over and over again. People start, I'm really innovative. We're now going to memorize things you can look up on an iPad. But the difference between that versus these guys in India who are teaching kids not just to think and understand the fundamental concepts, but to collaborate, to communicate, to persuade, to ask hard questions of each other, to synthesize, to make a result. This is teaching kids not just science, but it's teaching them the skills they're going to need going forward. No automation. So when we think about innovation in education, don't think about taking an obsolete model and putting it on an iPad. That's silly. Think about teaching kids they need to do and letting them spend more time on the important things and less time on the things that can just be done on your smartphone. So I will close, but I'm going to get everybody's answer. But in some ways, the real world is harsh. Okay, when you heat this pad, only one thing happens. In the world of education, the world isn't so harsh. And we have the opportunity in the way we organize education to make that whole expand, right? To give our kids bigger and broader opportunities. Estonia is working with Conrad Wolfram on computer-based math. They're teaching their entire math curriculum there, saying, assume you've got access to Wolfram Alpha, we're going to now make you great at data analysis, statistics, the things that really matter in the world, instead of doing what we do in the United States. And I'm good friends with Sal Khan and Khan Academy, but I've said to Sal, it's really heartbreaking to see kids factor polynomial on a computer when they're never going to do it. Okay, so we can do that, but if we take the wrong choices, we're going to see that whole contract. We're going to see opportunity set for our youth disappear. And what worries me is that if you live in a country with millions, or in our country, tens of millions of chronically unemployed youth, only horrible things happen. And that will tear society apart. So now I want to get, how many people, you have to be honest, pick China? Hold your hand up if you pick China as losing 10 million manufacturing jobs. Okay? Keep those hands up. Okay, so we're only going to look for people who got these exactly right. How many of those people that had China had 53.5%? Over half of recent college graduates in the United States, many saddled with unsustainable amounts of debt. And in the United States, by the way, student debt can never be forgiven. There's no ability to declare personal bankruptcy. If you leave college with $100,000 of debt and have trouble getting a job, two things happen. One is you go into default. You fall behind on your payment. So your interest rate goes from 3.5% to oftentimes 10% or more, and you can never forgive it. You essentially have signed yourself up for a lifetime death sentence when it comes to economics. Okay, so hands up, who got both of those right? Wow, okay. And now to the whole, and what I find so interesting about this is how the world works. I've asked this question to hundreds of people. Do you know who almost always gets it wrong? PhDs. PhDs in physics almost always get it wrong. PhDs in material science almost get it wrong. You know who almost gets it right? Almost always gets it right? Car mechanics, plumbers, nurse technicians. Because they know if you want to get a brake rotor plate off, you heat it because that hole will expand. They know if your ring finger is swelling and you want to get the ring off, heat it. It will expand. They know that if you want to, get something, pipes, to get tighter, you heat it. And so the hole actually does expand. My instincts were, this will just tell you how useful my PhD in engineering and master's in physics was. I thought it would get smaller. I bet, who knows? Just as a show of hand, how many thought it increases? How many thought it stays the same? And how many thought decreases? So there you have it. So I will close on that note. Opportunity set for our youth. It's under our control. Don't chase PISA scores, chase innovation and creativity. The other speakers will do a great job of telling you how, but I do think there's reasons to be very optimistic, but we should be scared as can be. Thank you very much.